because I get to spend the next 20 or so minutes speaking about a subject that I absolutely love, which is why I live and breathe it every single day, and that is designing development deals. So I'll let you ponder for a little bit exactly what that means just while I introduce myself, and then I'll put you out of your misery. But I'm Grace. I wear many, many hats in property, but two of the main hats are number one, I head up acquisitions at a property development and investment business called Melt Property. So I'm responsible for managing a pipeline of around £250 million worth of development deals, and those are a mix of residential and commercial opportunities. In addition to that, I have my property business, which is called Valentine Group. So I rarely have enough time to sleep or have a social life, but I definitely wouldn't have it any other way. So, designing development deals. What's it all about and why is it important? Well, there's something that I say a fair bit, and that is there is a lot that goes into a successful property development project that has absolutely nothing to do with digging a hole in the ground. And in fact, the construction work that takes place on site is just one part of the end to end development journey. So before we get to this point, there's a whole lot of work that goes into these projects up front that quite often goes unnoticed, but is absolutely critical to the project's success. And that's the stuff that happens here in the acquisition phase where the development journey begins. So, a developer's role is to take that site from the very first point of contact that we have with it, right through the construction phase, and then the true test is taking it to a successful exit, which is either making a profit on the sale or retaining and refinancing the units for rent. So, arguably, the most important part of a developer's role is how they set up that deal. So, how they put in the work during the acquisition phase, which is ultimately what makes or breaks a project and what makes or breaks a developer as well. And during this acquisition phase, we're working out whether or not a project is profitable, we're figuring out the project strategy, and we're figuring out all the issues, concerns, ways of working, the materials, all of that stuff that feeds into the remaining parts of the projects. But we're really ironing out all those issues up front so that enables a smooth delivery to happen. So that enables the construction part to be much more smoother and seamless, and the exit to be smoother and seamless because we've worked through all those potential issues up front and really got the project plan in place. So that's what allows us as developers to scale up our businesses and scale up the size of the projects that we do and the number of projects that we do is by putting in all this strategic work up front to the projects. And that can quite often be a 12 to 24-month process, depending on the size and the complexity of the deal and whether there's planning that's required and so on. So there is quite a lot of work and time that goes in up front, but more often than not, it's when things haven't been planned and worked through at the start that then we see issues during the construction phase happen and problems with sales and valuations down the line. And that's because the strategy hasn't been set out right from the outset.
So, how we avoid that from happening is by following.
A fairly structured process every time that I'm looking at a potential site. And it doesn't matter if it's residential, commercial, a big deal, a smaller deal, I always follow the same four-step process that enables me to design these deals in the right way. And the four steps that I go through when I'm designing these development deals during acquisition is number one, we've got to source the deal, aka we've got to find that deal. So that might be that a site is brought to us, or that we might actively go out and seek a site. But what's important here is it's more about how that particular deal is sourced. So for me personally, I find that most of the time the deals that are on market, so the deals that are front and center on Rightmove and Zoopla, tend not to work, especially for what I'm looking to do. They tend to be overpriced and there's not a lot of margin in those deals. But there's also a million and one other people looking at the same site. So you've got a lot of competition and someone's going to end up overpaying for it. So I prefer not to waste my time with that approach because that's not good use, obviously, of my time and that's not being operationally efficient. So I find I have a higher conversion rate when I'm looking at sites that are direct to vendor or that have been brought to my attention through my trusted network of professionals. So, my contractors, solicitors, architects, and so on, because those deals tend to be not so many people involved. And it also means that we can have a direct conversation with the vendor and they're more open to a creative deal structure, which works better in everybody's favor. So during this sourcing phase, I'm more concerned with how I'm going about and sourcing the deal and making sure that my channels are right so that I'm not wasting my time sifting through sites that just aren't going to work. So next we move on to appraising the deal. And this is where we're essentially looking at whether or not the numbers work on the site and whether or not it's profitable. And I find that if I've got my sourcing strategy right and using the channels that I know that work for me, then I don't have to spend as much of my time reviewing frankly pointless sites that don't work and are never going to work. So, here we're looking at the project costs, so things like the build costs, professional fees, the funding costs, and we're figuring out the end values of the project as well and making sure that there's the profit margin in the deal. But it's not just about having a spreadsheet that stacks because anyone can fudge about some numbers and make it work on paper. It's also taking a holistic view on this as well. So I'm looking to understand the local area, the types of homes that are trading in the area, the price of those homes, how frequently stock is moving, and the target audience as well. So it's all well and good having a spreadsheet that works, but I need to know that I'm building the right housing product for the right market. Otherwise, if I'm selling them on the open market, I'm going to be left struggling to exit the deal. So it's about getting the numbers on the spreadsheet right, but also equally about understanding and getting a feel for the market and the area in which you are looking to build for. The final two stages of designing development deals really go hand in hand together, and that is the deal structure and also the funding structure. And the reason they go hand in hand is because the deal structure then impacts upon when you need the funding and how much funding you need and in what form those funds take, whether that's equity in a site that's already there in the land, or if it's actually cash that's required in the deal. So it's not always a case of just purchasing a site outright and building a project and selling on. That outright purchase is one way to structure things, but there's many other ways to structure these deals too, and quite often many other better ways to structure these deals depending on the site specifically and what you're planning to do with it. Some of those other structures include joint ventures with the landowner, where if the landowner wants a share in the development profits and if they want to maximize their returns, then not only can they get the value of the land, but also share in the profit too. And there are other ways to de risk deals from the outset, which doesn't always happen with a straight out purchase. And those include forward funding structures whereby a sale is agreed to an end user, such as a housing association, upfront before the build even takes place. And that way, the project or an element of the project is de risked from the outset because we've got an exit to the deal secured. And therefore, our bank lending and equity funding doesn't need to be highly leveraged. So, those are just some examples of how we structure the deals a bit more creatively which definitely come in handy when we're looking to unlock some of these more challenging sites. It just means we've got more tools in our toolbox, basically. But when I'm going through these steps in designing these development deals, there are two main goals that I'm trying to achieve that are always at the forefront of my mind when I'm going through this process. And those are number one, I'm always looking to maximize the project return. So I'm always looking at how we can extract as much value as possible out of a particular site so that in turn the project can be as profitable as possible. However, at the same time, I'm also looking to minimize my risk. So we're not looking to make any foolish decisions, and we're looking to keep all stakeholders as safe as possible in the deal. So it is a constant balancing act between the two. Because as developers, we do need to push the boundaries a little bit in order for us to minimize the risk. However, if we end up pushing things too far and try and cram as many units as we possibly can on a site, then actually all that does is increase our risk. Because if you think about it, if we try to put too many units on a site, then is that really a desirable place for people to live? Is that what the market wants? Quite possibly not. And all that's going to end up happening is that we're going to have to do several price reductions, and our pound per square foot is going to go down, and our profit margin is going to go down. So we've actually increased our risk there by not really listening to the local market and trying to be greedy. So it is a fine balance between the two, but that's why it's important to put so much work into the upfront acquisition phase so that we can reach a happy medium. Okay, so let's take a look at how some of this stuff works in reality. So, this is a case study of a site that I'm currently working on in Surrey. It's the end yellowish building there. And this one actually came about through a contact that I'd met at some networking events. And I'd known him for a couple of years. And turns out he's been trying to build this site, I think, since about 2015, 2016. But he's really struggled to do that because he can't get the funding because he's not a developer. So then he's not been able to proceed with the project, nor is he probably the best placed party to build out the project, considering experience levels and so on. So from the outset, we actually knew the deal structure and how it was going to be funded because he was looking to do this as a joint venture with a developer because he wants to share in the development profits at the back end of the deal. So we knew how it was going to be structured. We knew that the bank lending would be a little bit lower leverage because there's equity there in the site that we can bring into the project. And we did all of that before even actually doing the appraisal, because if you've got a landowner that's willing to work with you and to structure things in a way that's mutually beneficial, then actually the appraisal is something that happens afterwards. So because he'd got the consents quite a while back as well, we're now having to go back around and change some of the things that were done to make it a smoother build process, but also to reduce costs and maximize the end values as well. So we're looking at less expensive materials that we can use on the development. We're looking at a different solution for the foundations, and also potentially changing up some of the internal layouts to extract more value from those units and from the space that's there. So we're spending a little bit, but that's to maximize our return and to minimize the risk that's involved as well with the project. And the great thing with this one is that our exit is secured. So the landowner actually wants to be the end buyer, I guess you could say, for this development. So instead of us having to find 9 buyers for the flats later in the project on the open market, there's actually 1 buyer rather than 9, and that's the landowner, and that's agreed upfront, so it de-risks the project. And there's one question that I ask myself as I go through this acquisition process, and that's not why on earth am I doing this, although that does come up a fair bit. But the question is, how can I add value? So I'm never really looking at things and taking them at face value. I'm always looking beyond what's already there. So, whether or not something already has planning consent for X amount of units, I'm always seeing, okay, how can I better that? What can I do to improve and enhance upon that? And yes, it improves profits and all of that fun stuff, but it also improves the quality of the design and the quality of the lives for the people who live in that building as well. So that could be changing up internal layouts to make it a better use of floor space. It could be adding an additional floor to a block of flats to maximize on the returns of the development and create a better scheme. But it could be adding value by helping out a landowner who's been trying to build out a site for a while, or adding value to the local community by regenerating old buildings or being more sustainable with our developments. So, focusing on this, of course, has a positive impact, but it can also be the differentiator between one, having the project actually go ahead, and two, having the project actually be a success at the end.
So, if we take a look at another case study now, this site here is one that I'm working on with Melt Property, and it's located in southwest England and is currently two big vacant empty department stores that are no longer in use. But with what we're planning to do with it, we should achieve a GDV of well in excess of £20 million. So, in terms of the sourcing of this one, this is a JV with the landowner. So, it was direct to landowner or direct to vendor. And I definitely can't take credit for that. That was someone else in the team that had that existing relationship. And as I said, it's a huge building, it's these two department stores. So, to put that into context with the plans that we're looking at doing, that would create in excess of 100 flats plus basement plus ground floor space. And that was if it was all to be residential. But on paper here, so 100 flats would work on a spreadsheet if we look at the GDV versus the build costs, project costs, blah, 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 all of that. And if we put that into an appraisal, but 100 flats in this whole building being sold on the open market isn't actually quite the right solution for this site because there's not the demand in this specific location for all of those 100 one and two bed flats to go onto the market, especially not at the same time. But because it's a conversion, generally you don't really do phasing with the conversion of buildings. So if we were to do all 100 units, open market and so on, we would probably be left struggling to sell a big chunk of those units. And we'd probably have to do several price discounts, a bit like what I was saying earlier on in the presentation. And there's also in the basement only parking for about half of the units. I think we have about 50 parking spaces that we can fit into this site. So any flats which don't have parking tend to be less desirable and you'll get less money for those, especially when there are other schemes in the area that do have parking. So it's about weighing up everything else that's going on in the area. And we're also probably not going to get residential here on the ground floor because it's in the town centre in an urban area. So they'll be looking for an active use there, probably commercial of some sort. So with sites like this, especially town centre ones where you can do a little bit more with them other than just the stock standard residential, it can be a bit more interesting and exciting, and you can get a little bit more creative with what you can do with these types of schemes because it's not so black and white as to, oh, okay, it's a residential area, we'll just build 9 flats. It's more, okay, what works right for this area and how can I structure this in a way where it fits the community, but it also makes it a viable project so that we can actually crack on and do the build. So, my task with this was to assess all the possible different end uses for the site and come up with a solution for what we could make work. And that's not just one solution, there's a whole number of them that we have been looking at. So, with this one, what we're looking at as the best sort of first case scenario of what we would do with the site and how we're progressing it is to have a structure similar to this. So, basement level, we know is parking, and around 50 odd parking spaces, maybe room to squeeze in a little bit more or to have some element of the ground floor co working as well beyond the basement. So ground floor to be co-working space, which we're speaking to a number of operators on at the moment. And that's because ground floor generally they prefer that to be some form of active use, like I mentioned before, and it's in the town centre as well. And then the upper floors, which is where we have space for around 100 odd units of residential accommodation, what we're looking to do with that is to have about half of it be open market residential that we would sell on to the likes of first time buyers and young professionals. And that's around 50 units. And that doesn't overstretch us or overexpose us in the local market with too much risk or anything like that, because that's a decent number of units to put on at the one time here, and also as long as we do a good marketing lead up as well to that. But the other 50%, we're currently looking at a couple of solutions for that, being either affordable housing, which would be then sold on to a affordable housing provider, and we would have that tied up front so that we've got the exit secured. Or a similar thing with a student accommodation operator as well, whereby the deal would be agreed up front too, so that we've got that exit secured there. And generally, those operators have a direct relationship with the local university as well. But to recap, so the four key things that I was trying to cover, I guess, in this presentation is that for a deal to be structured and to get across the line and so that we can start works on site, we need to go through this upfront structuring process, this designing process of development deals. And how I go about doing that is through these four phases, because it really breaks it down and makes it simplified as to what needs to happen when. But once all this has been done, once we've sourced the site, appraised the site, structured the deal, funded the deal, then we can actually start work on site and the build process can actually start, obviously once a lot of paperwork and so on has been done. And that's when we can finally begin the construction phase. But there's a whole lot of stuff that goes in up front to get us to this point of digging up a bit of dirt in the ground. So please do ask any questions away now, and here are my contact details as well if anyone would like to reach out or ask any questions directly. So thank you for your time.